Thank you very much for your interest in the paper Deceptive Negotiating, the Role of the Environmental Cue. This is part of a broader symposium on the causes and consequences of unethical behavior. This paper starts from the premise that all negotiations take place in space and in time, but we actually know very little about the impact of negotiators' physical and temporal surroundings on their behavior. So what I do in the paper is I examine negotiators' surroundings, which I call environmental cues, specifically the impact of those environmental cues on negotiators' propensity to deceive. To do that, what I do in the paper is catalog a variety of environmental cues that have been documented by the behavioral ethics literature and linked to deception, and I organize them into 6 categories. These categories include money, identity activating objects, clean spaces and objects, coloration and lighting conditions, smells and tastes, and time. I then, after cataloging the cues, compare and contrast the theoretical framework used in the deception literature against a popular framework from the negotiation literature. And then, with the theoretical differences and commonalities in mind, what I seek to do is explore the many ways that environmental cues could influence deception in a negotiation context. So why might this paper influence you? Well, I think if you are a behavioral ethics researcher or scholar, I think what the paper does is helps to organize all of the various and relatively disparate environmental cues in the literature into these 6 categories that I mentioned. The paper also, I think, fleshes out the underlying theoretical logic that's kind of implicit in many of the papers in the literature. If you're a negotiation scholar, I think what the paper does is helps to generate a really pretty wide array of interesting and unexplored research questions. Just as a few examples, it suggests that we might want to look at the impact of Skype, which essentially acts as a mirror by mirroring your own image on negotiators' deception. There's a fair amount of research in psychology saying that mirrors tend to activate people's objective self-awareness and make them more honest. Also, the paper speculates on the potential role of the color of negotiators' clothing and how that might impact their propensity to deceive. Also looks at the time of day, whether negotiators might have a higher propensity to deceive at a particular portion of the day. And also, I would say that the paper holds implications even outside of the negotiation literature, in the sense that negotiation is just kind of one of many social decision-making situations in organizations. So what the paper does is actually takes one of these situations, mergers and acquisitions, and also traces out some interesting ideas for future research on the role of environmental cues in something like M&A. So I will let you read the paper to learn more about those ideas. Just a little bit on why I chose AMP for this particular paper. This paper builds on a really strong evidentiary base in psychology. So the evidentiary base is there, but what the paper does is extends beyond that evidence base to try to inform a totally different and important area of inquiry, in this case, negotiations. And so, I thought that AMP was a great outlet to try and submit the paper to, because this is really in keeping with the mission of AMP to build from an existing evidence base, but kind of challenge a literature or multiple literatures to move forward based on what's already known. So I really hope that you, the listener or the reader, can benefit from this paper, specifically by using it as a reference. If you want to try to kind of understand all the environmental cues that are out there in the psychology and ethics literature, I hope that you can also use it, especially if you study negotiations, to generate your own interesting research projects on environmental cues. And then finally, I would say I hope you use this paper as inspiration to take your own stand, advance your own perspective on the literature, and raise new and important ideas for future research. So thanks for your interest again, and I hope that you benefit from the paper.